Hello and welcome to Skill of the Week for 6th grade Charles Burchfield monochromatic watercolor paintings. So we are getting our pictures drawn, and you need to make sure that you're looking at all of your angles and you're drawing lightly and you're drawing large. So I've got one drawn out. You can see it's done really lightly. It's using all of the space. It does come off the page a little bit, but I did that so that you can see the details a little bit more easily. You guys can draw it so that it all fits on there, but I did do a pretty large house and a pretty detailed, difficult house. But this one I felt like had a lot of contrast between the darks and the lights and having some medium values. So the first thing that I'm going to show you for watercolor, if you're ready, you have everything drawn out, then we're going to do a wet into wet wash. It's very similar to what we did when we did that 1st grade project, the underwater crayon resist, where we had to take water, one color. Now remember, it is monochromatic, so you're choosing one color. I've got purple. Purple is a super powerful color, so you want to really be careful not to use too much of it when you do your wash. So I also have a fat watercolor brush, and the watercolor brushes are over in the black drawers listed as watercolor brushes. But if you want to get a nice big one for this watercolor wash, so what you're going to do is we're doing wet into wet. So you're going to get your water and you're going to wet down your paper very gently, because if you scrape your paper, you're going to have lines all across it when you get your watercolor on there. So you want to make sure it's nice and wet. Now, you see why you need to draw lightly? Because I'm putting water over this whole thing, and it will smudge and smear if you have really dark lines. Okay, I'm checking it. I'm just glancing at an angle to make sure it's all wet. And while it is still wet, I take just a little bit of purple, okay? And I am just going to spread it into my painting. Okay, and know when to quit. Don't overdo it. Okay, so here is my wet into wet wash. It's very light. It's not overpowering. I just want enough color in there to get a little bit of background. Okay, now what you can tell is it's rippling, okay, and it's super wet. You're not going to be able to work into it right now because of how wet it is. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop the recording for a minute, and I'm going to use the hairdryer to dry the painting completely, and then I can go in and start painting details. Okay, so I'm back. I have dried my painting. I just wanted to show you on this hairdryer. You only want to move it to the middle slot so that the 300 is showing. Because if you move it all the way up to the top and you're blasting away at your painting, it's going to overheat really quick, and then you'll have to wait for it to cool down before you can start it again. So just make sure that you're using it just one movement up on the 300, and then you just lightly go across your painting. And you can see it's not ripply anymore. It's totally flat. That means it's all dry. And you can see that the purple is just very faint. That's what you want. You don't want it to be heavy, dark purple, because this is your background, and this is going to be the color of any of your really light areas. So anywhere I have white, which is my trim, that little triangle up there, all of the trim around my windows, these posts, those kinds of things, all those white areas are just going to be left alone because my background is light enough that that's going to be my white areas. Okay, so we're not making it totally white. We're going to leave it a little bit of a tint of color because we want to have some color in there. So now I've got my other materials. Okay, I have 2 green brushes, and they are up at the front table. These are very soft. They're round brushes, but yet they have just enough point on them so that I can do some detail. Okay, so I'm going to start putting in my detail on my painting. Okay, and I just want to get this up close so you can see. You have to really observe your values. And so I'm going to start in where these dark values are. If you notice right here, this is probably my darkest value in this whole painting. Anywhere there's a shadow or anywhere there's a dark window or anything like that, I can go in and I can do all of my dark areas first because they're kind of separate from each other, and you really don't want to be working areas that are right next to each other all at the same time, because here you got a wet area and then you try and do a wet area next to it and they're going to bleed together. So watercolor can be really tricky that way. So I'm going to use my small brush. I'm going to get some water into my cup. Now, don't hold your cup of watercolor over the top of your painting, because if you drip, you're going to have big blobs of paint on your painting. So I'm going to hold it over close to my water, and I'm just going to put water into my little cup so that I have a little pool of water down in. And you'll want to have a paper towel just in case you spill, or just in case you get a little bit too much watercolor. Then you can clean up, or you can take some paint off, because sometimes if you get too much, if you're quick and you get a paper towel on there and you just pull it off, you can pull that color right off of there. Okay, so I'm going to move that off to the side. I'm going to show you I have a little puddle of water in my watercolor. That will continue to soak into my watercolor and allow that to soften, and then I can just paint it right in here. You need to keep that little puddle kind of stable, so if it gets clear down, you need to fill it back up again. All right? So now I'm going to go in and I'm going to work, since I'm right-handed, I'm going to work from the left side to the right side, putting in my dark shadows. Okay, so I'm going to work with this shadow first over here on the side of my house. It's this, oops, I'm sorry. It's right there, that dark shadow that runs right along the edge of the roof. You can always add more color, but it's hard to take color away. So make sure that you're really careful with how you paint this. I'm just going to kind of paint where I have my really light lines. Now, it's really light right now, but I can build some more value into it if I need to, and I do because it's too light. This is a dark value on the picture, so I need to pay attention to putting that dark value in. Okay, so see how I'm adding more color to it. Okay, getting it a little bit darker. And I'm going to not overbrush that, because if I overbrush it, then I'll actually tear the paper a little bit because it's really getting wet. And I'm just going to work and then be done. Okay, and I don't want to pick it up and show you yet because I want to let it dry a little bit. But I'm going to work this next shadow. That's this area on the house. Okay, that little roof piece right there, that little triangle piece. And again, I'm just going to go right along the edge. That's why I have this nice small brush, because that's how you're going to end up getting a nice clean line, is using the small brushes. And then just fill it in. That way I don't go outside of my lines. If I just outline it first and then I fill it in with my watercolor, I can have a nice shadow on there. Okay, it's not totally even yet. I need a little more shadow down here, so I'm just adding a little bit more color. And I could actually wait for that to dry a little bit and see if it needs more color or if it's dark enough. I'm going to let it sit for a little bit now, and I'm going to go to the next shadowed area on that side of the roof. And actually, you know what? Instead of doing that, because I've got some shaded areas, I'm going to go ahead and go underneath where we see shadows on underneath the eave. Since they're over here and they're not touching those areas, I can actually work that area. So I'm going to turn it so I can paint under the eave. And it's just a nice thin line. Remember that my boards of the eave are white, so I'm leaving those alone. I don't want to paint those because I'm leaving them the color of the paper. Okay, and then there's a little shadowed area right here on the roof. And then there's a shadow right here. My lines are super light, so you might not be able to see the lines that I'm painting, but you can see the picture that I'm painting. Okay, I'm just painting where I see a shadow. See, the use of my little tiny brush is really helpful in getting that fine line that I need to paint the details. And then there are some details in the window that I see. Okay, some dark areas here. Paint those. But again, the trim on the windows is white. So I don't want to paint the trim. Pay close attention to your lines. If you've just drawn a line for the trim and you've not drawn any space, you need to be extra careful because it's tempting to just paint that line when you really need to paint the space. Okay, not the trim itself. Now, right here, I'm painting some weird shapes because my picture shows right here that the shadows kind of go up and show some lines and things like that. So I'm painting some of those lines in there. Notice that I'm still outlining a little bit first, and then I'm just blending it in with my color. And the rest of it is fairly light, so I'm just going to leave those and go on to my shadow on the roof over here. Now, one thing that's funny about this particular roof is it's got this kind of parallelogram shape, and then it's got a couple of shadows on the sides. Now, this is a really large area that I would have to fill in. You can see that I would have to fill in a pretty large area here. So I'm actually going to use a little bit of a larger brush, get it wet before I dip it into my paint. And then I'm going to fill that area in. So it goes a little bit faster. I can blend it a little bit better because my paint that I outlined with is not drying. Okay, I need it to stay wet to blend it. And if it starts to get too dark, you can always grab a little more water out of your cup and just blend it with the water. Because remember, the more water we add, the lighter your color becomes. Okay, now this, I got a little bit of paint outside of my lines, so I was a little bit too anxious. So I might not be able to clean that up, but I'm going to try to. I'm going to dip my paper towel in my water and just kind of touch it. Hopefully that will help a little, but it's not helping. So if I mess with it too much, I'm going to actually tear my paper, so I'm going to just leave it. Hopefully it won't affect the painting too much. Just be careful when you're inside your lines. So anyway, this value is not totally dark, but the shadows beside it are a little bit darker. So I am going to add a little bit of shadow in here. There's a shadow that runs. Oh, by the way, when you're grabbing water, make sure that you wipe the edge off like that. Don't click it on the side because it will spray water everywhere. And if you've got a neighbor who's using a different color than you, they're not going to appreciate having their painting sprayed with your color. Okay, so this is a bit darker. I probably should have waited for that to dry just a little bit so I could get so it wouldn't bleed, but I'm just going to kind of paint that in there. So just let it, I'm blowing on it so it can dry so I can lift it up and show you. Okay, I'm getting some shadows in there. And then there's a piece on this part of the roof. It's this area right here that I'm going to also paint. Okay, and then I'll do the shadows on this side. Okay, so your basic understanding is that you're painting all your dark areas first and just kind of making sure that you move around, but don't put your arm over something that's just been painted because then you're going to get paint all over your arm. You're going to smudge it across your painting. Just be really careful to paint in dry areas, and then you can go back into those dry areas. Like this is dry now, so I can go back and I can paint some areas over here, paint some areas that are touching it, that kind of thing. But a lighter area, like let's say I want to go back in now and paint the roof. Well, the roof, notice it's lighter than the shadow. So what I can do to make sure that it stays lighter, okay, make sure those are dry before I go and work in here, I can grab some water and I can paint that water into that space. So I'm going to do a little wet into wet wash kind of right here so that I don't accidentally get too much paint in there. And then grab my paint and just start brushing it in. Now, I want it spread around. You can see it's really dark, so I need to spread it around, make sure it mixes in with that water. And if I feel like, oh gosh, it's way too dark, it's not going to look right, I can always grab my paper towel and I can pull some of that value out. Okay, like right in the center, it's really dark. So I can grab my paper towel, kind of tap on that, and pull some of that value out. It does allow for a little bit of texture on there, and it looks like I got a little bit too much right there because that's supposed to be my trim, unfortunately. So I got a little bit too much there, but what I could do to fix that is not stress over it, let that dry a little bit, and then I could go back and do the top of my trim and blend that into my roof, and that will help, okay? So, you know, accidents like that are going to happen, especially if you drew as lightly as I did, and I drew really lightly. So in some areas, it's really hard to see my color, or I mean my pencil lines. So I'm going to do another little wet wash right here. My paintbrush is a little bit on the purple side because my cup of water is starting to turn purple, but that's okay because I need that purple anyway. Okay, that's really dark. See how deep valued purple is? So we need to be really careful when we're using purple. So I'm going to grab my paper towel, pull some of that color out so that I don't have too much there. And then I can always blend back in, okay, if I need to. Getting a little bit of value on there, not too much. Getting it right down to the roof line. Okay. And again, I went over my line because my line is a little bit light. It's hard to see. So I might have to blend back in there again. But once that's dry, I can do that. Let's see if this is dry enough. Okay, this is still a little bit, you can see if it's rippling, it's a little bit too wet to work next to. So I might have to work in a totally different area. But you can see if I have more water in my cup, if I add water to my painting, I can keep my values a little lighter because it's going to be really challenging with purple. Red can be really dark as well. Green and blue are pretty dark. We do have orange and brown as well. But remember, water is your friend, but it can be your enemy too. So a little bit of water is going to help keep it light. And then you can blend with water as well. But don't overbrush it. One thing I wanted to show you before this gets... Okay, see these little speckly things here? That's where the paper is kind of getting soaked and saturated with water. It's getting a little bit tired of holding water, so don't brush anymore, okay? This is okay because it's on a textured area of the roof anyway, but you can start to see that the house is starting to gain dimension because I have shadowed areas, I have lighter areas that are creating a flat area, and I have some shadows, okay? So you can see that it starts to get some dimension. So we're gonna take a break there so that you guys can start getting your basic values down. And then when this is all dry, I'll work on this some more. And when this is all dry, I'll show you how to go in and start working on little details like my textures in my roof, any kind of boards that you need to paint or anything like that. Okay, so good luck. Pay attention. Take your time, and let's not rush this, all right? Good luck.